Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we take a journey. A journey not only through time, but into a world where laughter lived in every living room in America. A world shaped by one man who stepped onto thousands of stages and made millions of people feel as if he was speaking directly to them. His name was Bob Hope. To understand Bob Hope, you have to understand the world he lived in. A world glowing with the soft light of black and white television sets. A world where families didn't gather out of convenience, but out of tradition. In the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, television was not noise. It was not background chatter. It was an event. Kids rushed to finish their homework. Mothers cleaned the kitchen a little faster. Fathers adjusted the antenna one last time. And when the network announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Hope," America smiled all at once. Picture a quiet suburban street in 1958, streetlights humming, a warm breeze drifting through open windows. Inside a modest living room, a family sits together, dad in his chair, mom with a cup of coffee, children on the carpet, eyes fixed on the screen. The television glows with silver light as Bob Hope appears, a sharp suit, perfect timing, and a smile brighter than anything else in the room. Then the joke comes, a pause, the punchline, and the home fills with shared laughter, the kind that echoed through neighborhoods across the entire nation. Bob Hope didn't just tell jokes, he held America together during wartime and peacetime, during celebrations and during difficult days. He traveled the world to entertain troops who needed a taste of home. He stood under hot stage lights for hours so a young soldier could forget fear for a moment. Back home, his holiday specials were national traditions. Thanksgiving felt incomplete without Bob Hope. Christmas didn't feel right without his monologue. New Year's Eve sparkled a little brighter when his jokes opened the night. Today, entertainment is everywhere, in pockets, on phones, at every hour. But back then, you had one television, three channels, and one Bob Hope. There were no rewinds and no replays. If you missed the show, you missed history. Still, everyone watched together. People remember not only the jokes, but where they were sitting, who they were with, and what the room smelled like. They remember the small moment of happiness they shared as a family. Bob Hope had a presence few performers ever matched. He could walk onto a stage and in 5 seconds the room belonged to him. He didn't read jokes. He delivered them as if he were handing out gifts. Even when the camera stopped rolling and the lights dimmed and he walked backstage with tired eyes, he still joked, still smiled, still lifted spirits. For those who grew up in the Bob Hope era, his voice became a part of their lives, their childhoods, their homes, their memories. He was not only entertainment, he was the sound of American life. Tonight, we begin this story by opening a time capsule. Inside are warm evenings, old sitcoms, crackling radios, wooden TV sets, neon lights, and the unforgettable voice of a man who helped a nation forget its worries. This is where our journey begins. This is the world of Bob Hope. Backstage memories. The real stories of the Bob Hope era were not always the ones seen on television. Some of the best memories live behind the curtain. Backstage, where the cameras never pointed, it was a world full of energy, noise, mistakes, laughter, and people whose names never made it into the credits, but whose work shaped every show. Backstage was never quiet. You could hear typewriters clicking in the writer's room, costume racks rolling across the floor, crew members shouting instructions, props falling, people laughing, people panicking, and shoes tapping across concrete as the clock moved closer to showtime. And in the middle of all this chaos was Sam, a stagehand everyone loved despite the fact that he forgot almost everything. Sam lost microphones, cue cards, props, and sometimes even his own clipboard. One night, just 10 minutes before a live broadcast, Sam lost the main microphone. Not a spare, not a backup. The only one Bob Hope was supposed to use. When Bob asked him where the microphone was, Sam froze completely still, as if turning into a statue might solve the problem. Bob looked him in the eyes and said, "Sam, if you lose one more microphone, you'll be the one doing my monologue tonight." Sam didn't move a muscle. The entire crew fell apart laughing, and the best part was this. Sam was holding the microphone in his hand the whole time. Then there was Mary, the costume lady. Mary was sweet, helpful, and always smiling, but she had a talent for mixing up outfits in ways no one else could. One night she handed Bob Hope a suit that was 2 sizes too big. Bob tried it on and looked like he was swimming inside the jacket. He held up the sleeves and whispered, "Mary, am I hosting a comedy show or joining the circus?" Mary laughed so hard she nearly dropped her pincushion. Bob walked on stage with the oversized suit anyway and opened the show by saying, "I asked for a little room to breathe, but Mary must think I'm sharing this suit with 3 other guys." The audience roared with laughter. It became one of the most remembered openings of the season. Then there was Hank, the microphone repairman. Hank believed that tape could fix absolutely anything. If something broke, he wrapped it in layers of tape and said it was better than new. During one Christmas special, the microphone sparked, popped, and let out a puff of smoke. People screamed. Someone yelled for help. Hank walked up calmly, blew on the microphone like he was blowing out birthday candles, tapped it twice with his finger, and handed it back. Bob looked at the microphone and said, "Well, folks, either my jokes are getting better, or this mic has had enough of me tonight." The room exploded with laughter. Backstage wasn't just mistakes and emergencies. It was also pranks, because everyone who worked on the show felt like a family. And families, of course, love to play jokes on one another. One night, the writers replaced Bob's cue cards with completely blank sheets of paper. Bob walked out on the stage, looked down, and saw nothing written there. He looked at the audience, looked back at the card, and said, "Well, folks, tonight's jokes are brought to you by my writers, or at least they would be if they had written anything." The crowd loved it. The writers laughed so hard backstage that they nearly ruined the next scene. There were peaceful moments too. Writers sitting together, erasing and rewriting punchlines until sunrise. A makeup artist humming while brushing powder off Bob's face. A stagehand polishing the microphone like it was something sacred. The orchestra warming up in the corner with soft jazz notes. The distant sound of the audience settling into their seats as the minutes counted down to showtime. All these little moments, the quiet ones, the funny ones, the chaotic ones, created the rhythm and heartbeat of the Bob Hope era. Because the truth is simple, the Bob Hope Show wasn't built only on jokes. It was built on people. People who cared. People who made mistakes. People who laughed together and worked late nights together. People who loved the show as much as the audience at home did. And now that we've stepped behind the curtain, it's time to follow Bob into one night he never forgot. A night that was funny, strange, mysterious, and absolutely unforgettable. A night known simply as the Palm Springs night. The final memory. There comes a point in every life, especially long, busy, unforgettable lives, When the most valuable things are not trophies, awards, or television ratings. They are moments, moments that live quietly in the corners of the mind, soft enough to fade, strong enough to last forever. For Bob Hope, a man who lived almost a century, a man who traveled the world, who shook hands with presidents, who performed for millions of people, and who made entire generations laugh. His final memories were not about the stage. They were about what the stage meant. Tonight we look at that last memory, not his last television show, not his last joke, but the memory he kept closest to his heart as the world changed around him. The world changes, but memories don't. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, America was moving into a new era. Television changed, music changed, comedy changed, the country itself changed. Bob Hope watched everything evolve. So color television replaced black and white. Cable replaced antennas. VHS tapes replaced live broadcasts. New comedians appeared, younger, louder, faster. Families no longer gathered around a single screen. Life became faster, louder, more complicated. And yet, whenever he visited small towns or military bases or retirement homes or even walked into a grocery store, he heard the same thing over and over. I grew up watching you. My parents never missed your Christmas specials. You were part of our home. You made us feel like a family. These moments meant more to Bob Hope than any applause ever could. Because the truth is simple, television shows end, seasons end, ratings go up and down, but memories stay. The power of togetherness. People didn't just watch Bob Hope. They watched with someone, a father and his daughter, a mother and her teenage son, a family sitting together in a room lit only by a warm lamp and the soft glow of a TV screen. Bob Hope became a bridge, connecting people who would have otherwise drifted apart. Years later, those same families grew older. Some lost their parents or siblings or childhood homes. Life moved forward, as it always does. But when they remembered Bob Hope, they didn't just remember a comedian. They remembered a moment, a warm, shared moment that felt safe and simple and eternal. That was the heart of his final memory. Not about him, but about them. Many performers look back on their careers and think about fame or success or opportunities. But Bob Hope thought about the audience, the people he never met, but always felt close to. He remembered the handwritten letters from soldiers overseas who watched his shows on tiny screens in cold barracks. He remembered the families who waited all year for his holiday specials. He remembered the children who grew up laughing before they understood the jokes. He didn't treasure the jokes themselves. He treasured the people who laughed at them. They were the final memory. In his older years, when his hair had turned silver, and the spotlight no longer followed him every day, Bob Hope would sit in his living room. In quiet moments, surrounded by decades of photographs, posters, scripts, trophies, and letters, he would pick up an old photograph, a black and white image of a live audience. From the 1950s, people dressed in suits and dresses, people smiling, people leaning forward in their seats, waiting for the next joke, the next story, the next moment of shared happiness. He'd hold that photo in his hands and say softly, "Look at them. Look how happy they were. That's what mattered. That's what it was all about." That simple photograph of strangers he never came to know was the memory he cherished most. Because in their faces, he saw the meaning of his life. It wasn't the fame. It wasn't the spotlight. It wasn't the size of the audience. It was the joy he gave them, a joy he hoped would stay long after he was gone. The echo of laughter. As the years passed, and America continued to change, Bob Hope's legacy shifted from comedian to something deeper. He became nostalgia itself, a living reminder of a time when humor was gentle, when families watched together, when the world felt a little slower, a little warmer, a little kinder. To older generations, his voice became a doorway to their childhoods, to their parents' living rooms, to moments that could never be repeated, but always remembered. And that was his final memory. Not the jokes, not the fame, not the history books, but the laughter, the shared laughter that united millions of people across decades, across states, across generations. Laughter that stayed alive long after the stage lights dimmed. The goodbye that isn't really goodbye. Near the end of his life, Bob Hope spoke softly to a friend about the meaning of everything he had done. He said, "I didn't want to be remembered as the best. I wanted to be remembered as someone who made people feel good. If I did that, then that's enough." And the truth is, he did. Not because he was perfect, not because every joke landed, not because he never made mistakes, but because he cared. He cared about the audience more than he cared about himself. And that is why people remember him today. Not as a comedian, but as a part of their lives and the memory we share. As we close this part of the story, we carry one truth with us. Bob Hope didn't just bring laughter, he brought people together. He gave families a reason to sit in the same room. He gave soldiers a moment of home when home felt impossibly far away. He gave a nation hope in the simplest, most human way. His final memory isn't one moment, it's all of them. Every laugh, every smile, every warm evening spent in front of a glowing screen, and as long as someone remembers. Those nights, those shows, those jokes, Bob Hope still lives. Not on television, not in reruns, but in the hearts of the people who once gathered just to hear him speak. The America Bob Hope left behind. As time moved forward and the world changed, America slowly stepped out of the era that Bob Hope had helped define. The televisions became brighter, the channels multiplied. Technology evolved, and the country began to move faster than ever before. But even as everything changed, one thing remained: the memory of what it felt like to live in the age of Bob Hope. People often say that the world of the 1950s through the 1970s felt smaller, warmer, and somehow more connected. And for millions of Americans, that feeling is tied directly to Bob Hope, because he wasn't just part of entertainment, he was part of life. He was there during the Cold War. He was there during major cultural shifts. He was there when families gathered in their living rooms, not to escape the world, but to understand it, through a voice they trusted. And now, with time stretching farther from that golden age, many people look back and think, we didn't know how good those days were. Not because life was easier, but because life felt shared. Bob Hope represented that spirit. He symbolized a time when America laughed together, sat together, and experienced life at the same pace. For older generations today, those memories are more valuable than ever. They remember a time before smartphones, before the internet, before the noise of the modern world, a time when the biggest excitement of the week was a new Bob Hope special on television, and the entire neighborhood talking about it the next morning. They remember the sound of his voice. They remember the way their parents reacted to his jokes. They remember sitting on the floor, leaning forward, not wanting to miss a word. And as the years pass, these moments become less about the jokes themselves and more about the lives connected to them. A soldier watching from a base overseas, a family crowded around a small TV in the Midwest, a teenager who didn't fully understand the jokes, but loved the sound of laughter filling the room, a mother who found comfort in his Christmas specials during difficult times, a father adjusting the antenna one last time, just as Bob Hope appeared on the screen. These memories form the America that Bob Hope left behind, an America held together not by technology, but by shared moments. And even though the world today feels bigger, faster, and more complicated, the memories of that simpler time remain soft and warm in the hearts of those who lived it. Because Bob Hope didn't simply perform, he shaped an era. He gave people something to look forward to. He made hard days a little easier, quiet nights a little brighter, and holidays feel like home. And as older generations think back on their lives, they realize something important. The America they remember isn't gone. It lives inside the stories they tell. It lives in their laughter. When they recall a favorite joke, it lives in the pictures of old living rooms. And the glow of televisions long since replaced, it lives because Bob Hope became more than a comedian. He became a symbol of unity, comfort, and shared happiness. And in that way, his legacy didn't end when the camera stopped rolling. It continues. Every time someone remembers what life felt like. During the Bob Hope era, the holiday traditions that only Bob Hope fans remember. For millions of Americans who grew up in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s, the holiday season had a rhythm, a familiar pattern that signaled the start of something warm, joyful, and unmistakably American. And a part of that rhythm was Bob Hope. Families didn't just celebrate Thanksgiving, Christmas, or New Year's. They celebrated Bob Hope's holiday specials. These shows were not simply television events. They were traditions, moments that brought families together in a way people today sometimes forget. When the holiday season arrived, kids knew exactly what to expect. Someone in the house would say, "Bob Hope comes on tonight." And suddenly the whole evening became special. People remember the smell of fresh pine trees in the living room, Christmas lights flickering across the walls, wrapping paper scattered on the floor, and a TV glowing in the corner. As Bob Hope told a joke about shopping lines, winter weather, or the endless search for the perfect gift, his voice became part of the holidays, just like carols, ornaments, or family dinners. For soldiers serving overseas, Bob Hope's holiday shows were more than entertainment. They were a reminder of home. Every year he visited bases around the world. He performed for troops in the snow, in the heat, in remote camps, and in dangerous areas, where laughter meant more than anyone could truly understand. They didn't just laugh. They felt remembered. They felt connected to home, even when home felt impossibly far away. For families back in the United States, watching the holiday specials became an emotional experience. Parents would tear up, when Bob spoke to the soldiers. Children would sit quietly for once, listening to his stories. Grandparents would nod slowly because they knew what it meant to have someone bring comfort in hard times. These memories became part of what Americans now call the good old days. People remember the jokes that opened each show, the special celebrity guests, the big musical numbers, the moments when Bob Hope held the microphone and delivered heartfelt words about gratitude, peace, and home. Even today, older Americans can recall the warmth of those nights as clearly as the lights on a Christmas tree. But there was something even deeper. Bob Hope had a way of talking about America that felt honest, hopeful, and reassuring. His holiday messages felt personal, like an old friend reminding you that life was still good even when times were uncertain. And although the world has changed dramatically, those memories remain. They live inside the people who experience them. They live in family stories, in old recordings, and in the hearts of those who grew up waiting for that one special night when Bob Hope would appear on their television and make the season feel whole. His holiday specials weren't just shows. They were moments of unity. They were reminders of what mattered. And they became one of the 25 things that only Bob Hope fans from that era will ever truly understand. Because when Bob Hope spoke during the holidays, America listened. And when he made the country laugh for a moment just a moment, everything felt perfect. The people who made the Bob Hope era. When people talk about the Bob Hope era, they often talk about Bob Hope himself. The jokes, the timing, the charisma, the world tours, the holiday specials, the long list of celebrities he worked with, and the decades he spent in the spotlight. But there is another side to this story, a side that rarely gets told. The people who shaped the era were not only the writers, producers, or the stars who appeared on stage. The era belonged to the audience, to the families, to the viewers who sat in small living rooms, crowded together on sofas, eating dinner on TV trays, and watching Bob Hope as if he were a member of the family. This is their story, the forgotten half of the Bob Hope era. Families in the 1950s through the 1970s. The America of that time was different in ways that are hard to describe today. Houses were smaller, families were larger, Sundays were quiet, weeknights had routines. Children played outside until the street lights turned on. There were no phones to distract anyone, no endless streams of content. Life moved at a steady human pace. People didn't just watch television, they planned for it. It was a moment of the day that had meaning. Dinner was finished early, so everyone could gather in the same room. Kids were told to be quiet because their parents didn't want to miss the jokes. Neighbors sometimes visited one another to watch the same program because not everyone had a good TV. And when Bob Hope appeared on screen, everyone stopped. The jokes weren't just jokes, they were events. People still remember what the room felt like. The warmth of a lamp, the soft hum of the TV, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air, a child leaning against their father's leg, a mother smiling without even realizing it. That was the America that made the Bob Hope era possible, an America filled with families who found joy in simple moments and laughter in gentle humor. The viewers who never spoke but always listened. One of the quiet truths of Bob Hope's career is that many of his biggest fans never met him, never saw a live show, and never wrote a letter. They were ordinary people, factory workers, teachers, soldiers, farmers, bus drivers, Mothers raising children, fathers working long hours, grandparents sitting in rocking chairs. They didn't need front row seats. They didn't need autographs. All they needed was the comfort of hearing Bob Hope's voice. At the end of a long day, there were families who had little money, but treasured their television because it brought them moments of happiness. Some households watched the same Bob Hope episode over and over for years because it was recorded on a fragile reel. That still worked just well enough. For them, Bob Hope wasn't a celebrity. He was a companion, a familiar friend, who visited their home every week and made the world feel lighter. The immigrant families who found a piece of America through him. Bob Hope's fans were not only born in the United States, he had an enormous impact on families who had immigrated to America in search of opportunity and stability. These families watched Bob Hope, not because they understood every joke at first, but because he represented the country they were trying to become a part of. For many, his shows were a first lesson in American culture, American humor, and American warmth. Children of immigrants would help translate some of the jokes to their parents. Parents would laugh, even when they didn't understand the punchline, because the laughter of their children was more important than any translation. A single TV show helped them feel like they belonged. For these families, Bob Hope was not just entertainment, he was part of their American dream. The military families who clung to his voice. There were millions of viewers whose connection to Bob Hope was deeper than the average household viewer. Military families. When Bob performed for troops overseas, his shows were watched back home by families sitting anxiously by the phone, hoping for news, hoping for letters, hoping for comfort. Bob Hope became a lifeline between soldiers abroad and their families at home. Parents whose sons were stationed far away watched his specials because they knew their children might be watching the same show from a distant base on a small, flickering screen. For those families, Bob's jokes were not just jokes. They were signs of life, signs of hope, signs that their loved ones were still connected to home. It is hard to explain the comfort that a single shared show could bring to a family waiting for safe returns. But those who lived it never forgot it. The generation that carried him forward. People often forget that a performer's legacy is not built by the performer alone. It is built by the people who choose to remember. The generation that grew up with Bob Hope carried his memory into adulthood and into old age. They became parents and introduced their children to old reruns and VHS tapes. They became grandparents and told stories about the good old days. When entertainment had a different kind of heart, they shared memories of a simpler America, a slower America, a more connected America. And each time someone said, "We used to watch Bob Hope together," they kept a piece of him alive. The power of memory. Memories have a way of becoming more beautiful. As time passes, what people remember about the Bob Hope era is not the exact jokes, not the ratings, not the celebrity guests. They remember the feeling of sitting together, the feeling of being part of something, the feeling of laughter filling a room, and making the world feel safe, even if just for a moment. That feeling is what keeps the Bob Hope era alive today. Not the screens, not the shows, but the hearts that still carry those moments. As long as those memories remain, as long as someone smiles. When they hear his name, as long as families say, "We watched him together." The Bob Hope era will never truly end. It lives through the people who made it possible. How Bob Hope shaped the golden years of American television. When people talk about American entertainment today, with streaming platforms, countless channels, and endless content, it becomes easy to forget that the foundations of television were built by a handful of people, people whose voices carried across the country. Long before entertainment became digital, instant, and disposable, among those early architects, Bob Hope stood tallest. To understand Bob Hope is to understand the birth of American television itself, because he wasn't just a performer who adapted to the times, he created the times. And for millions of people who grew up in the 1950s through the 1970s, he became the face, the sound, and the spirit of what television could be. The early days of television. In the early years of TV, the technology was still new. Television sets were heavy, bulky, and expensive. There were few channels, reception was unreliable, and shows were often performed live, with no second chances and little room for mistakes. But families loved it. Television brought the world into their living rooms, in a way radio never could. And when Bob Hope entered the medium, everything changed. His comedic timing, his stage presence, his confidence in front of a live audience. These qualities transferred seamlessly into TV. He became one of the first performers who understood how to speak, not just to the audience in the studio, but to the millions watching at home. People felt like he was speaking to them directly, even though he was miles away. That was his gift. Making television feel personal. Bob Hope had a unique ability. He made television feel intimate. Families who had never left their hometowns felt connected to Hollywood because Bob Hope brought Hollywood into their living rooms. He joked with celebrities, interviewed performers, and traveled the world but he always spoke in a way that felt familiar to ordinary people. He was the bridge between the glamour of show business and the simplicity of everyday American life. For many viewers, Bob Hope's voice was the first TV voice they ever recognized instantly. When the network announcer said, "Tonight, Bob Hope," Americans knew exactly what they were about to get. Laughter, warmth, comfort, stability. It is impossible to overstate how important that feeling was. In an era marked by war, political tension, social change, and uncertainty, Bob Hope didn't just entertain, he reassured. The Hollywood connection. Bob Hope also became one of the biggest gateways between Hollywood films and American households. He introduced upcoming movies, brought on film stars, and teased behind-the-scenes stories that audiences would never have heard otherwise. Before social media, before interviews were everywhere, before celebrities shared their personal lives online, Bob Hope's specials were one of the only ways ordinary families could feel close to the world of movies. For many viewers, Bob Hope represented the magic of Hollywood, a world filled with bright lights, famous faces, and dreams larger than life. Yet he delivered that magic in a relatable, approachable way, traveling the world and bringing it home. Another part of Bob Hope's legacy was the way he traveled the world and brought those experiences back to American audiences. He visited soldiers in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. He performed in deserts, snowstorms, jungles, and remote bases far from home. And when he returned to the United States, he shared stories of the people he met. Stories of bravery, loneliness, hope, and humanity. His global tours made Americans feel connected to the rest of the world At a time when international travel was rare and expensive, Bob Hope became a storyteller, not only of comedy, but of the human experience. The golden standard of variety shows. Bob Hope didn't invent the variety show, but he perfected it. Comedy sketches, monologues, musical numbers, celebrity guests, special themes, holiday traditions. He took all of these elements and shaped them into a format that future generations would imitate for decades. Shows like The Tonight Show, The Carol Burnett Show, Saturday Night Live, and dozens more owe part of their DNA to the template Bob Hope created. He didn't just participate in television history, he helped write it. The emotional impact on America. For older Americans today, Bob Hope represents something deeper than entertainment. He represents a time when television was new and exciting, when families gathered together, when humor was wholesome, and when the world felt both big and small. At the same time, people remember the excitement of a new Bob Hope special, the sound of the theme music, the hush that fell over the living room when he delivered his opening monologue, the laughter that followed moments later, the feeling that, for at least an hour, everything was okay. These memories became anchors in the lives of millions. And as those viewers grew up, aged, and passed these stories on, Bob Hope became not only a comedian, but a symbol of an era that can never be fully recreated. The enduring legacy, even today in a world of advanced technology and endless entertainment options, the legacy of Bob Hope endures. He set the tone for what television could be. He showed that humor didn't have to be cruel to be effective. He proved that entertainment could be meaningful, uplifting, and unifying. And for those who lived through his era, he remains a part of their identity, a memory they cherish, a connection to the people they watch with, parents, grandparents, siblings, and friends long gone. Bob Hope shaped American entertainment, but more importantly, he shaped American life. And that is one of the 25 things only Bob Hope fans from the 1950s to the 1970s truly understand. How Bob Hope connected America. When historians look back at the 20th century, they often speak of major political moments, social movements, wars, and inventions. But sometimes the things that shape a nation are not the dramatic events, but the quiet, shared experiences that bring people together without them even realizing it. Bob Hope was one of those experiences. For 3 decades, he helped unite a country that was often divided by geography, politics, economics, and culture. His voice traveled across all of it, from the biggest cities to the smallest towns, from wealthy suburbs to modest country homes, from military bases to college dormitories. Wherever laughter was needed, Bob Hope seemed to appear. A shared language of humor. Laughter can cross boundaries that nothing else can, and Bob Hope understood that completely. His jokes were simple, clever, unthreatening, and universal. They didn't rely on cruelty, shock values, or controversy. Instead, they relied on timing, charm, and a kind of warmth that made people feel safe. Families from different backgrounds could all laugh together. Parents and children found the same jokes funny for different reasons. Grandparents could enjoy a performance without feeling alienated by modern humor. Bob Hope created a shared language, a form of comedy that didn't require explanation or translation. This was one of the reasons he became a national symbol. Crossing generational lines. Few entertainers in history have managed to connect with three full generations at the same time. But Bob Hope did. He spoke to the grandparents who remembered the days before television. He spoke to the parents who watched his shows after work. And he spoke to the kids who crawled onto the living room floor and listened to his voice, even if they didn't understand every joke. Multiple generations laughed at the same moments and shared the same memories in a world where families often grow apart. Because of age differences, Bob Hope managed to bridge the gap. His humor didn't belong to one age group, it belonged to everyone. The rural and the urban, a national connection. America has always been a country filled with different lifestyles, big cities, small farms, industrial towns, coastal communities, mountain villages. These places rarely share the same experiences, but Bob Hope's voice found its way into all of them. Farmers in Kansas listened to him after long days in the fields. Factory workers in Detroit watched him after their shifts ended. Families in New York crowded around the television in tiny apartment living rooms. Retirees in Florida sat in rocking chairs, laughing softly at his monologues. In an era with far fewer entertainment options, Bob Hope became one of the few things America experienced together. He was a thread woven across the entire country. A stable presence during unstable times. From the 1950s to the 1970s, America faced enormous changes: the Cold War, social unrest, economic challenges, the Vietnam War, shifts in culture and identity, technological leaps that reshaped daily life. Amid all of this, Bob Hope remained a constant presence. He appeared on holidays, on special broadcasts, on tours for the troops, and in living rooms throughout the nation. His humor offered comfort. During moments when comfort was needed most, people who lived through those decades often say, no matter what was happening in the world, Bob Hope made us feel like everything was going to be all right. That sense of reassurance is something only people from that era truly understand. The national gathering place. Long before social media, long before streaming platforms, long before the modern sense of community, Bob Hope created a gathering place for millions of people who never met one another, but felt connected all the same. His shows became cultural landmarks. Everyone watched his Christmas specials. Everyone talked about his monologues. Everyone knew his jokes about politics, Hollywood, and everyday life. Families who lived thousands of miles apart were laughing at the same moments. At the same time, this sense of unity is nearly impossible to replicate today, but those who lived through it still feel it deeply. The importance of being present. Bob Hope's legacy isn't simply that he was funny, it's that he showed up. He showed up for millions of viewers every week. He showed up for soldiers in other countries. He showed up for charities, hospital events, fundraising drives, and community projects. He showed up because he believed that an entertainer's job was not to be above the audience, but to be with them. This attitude shaped the way Americans saw him. He wasn't just a star, he was a presence, a voice, a reliable part of their lives. Even today, older Americans speak of him as if he were someone they personally knew. That is the power of presence. That is the power of being consistent. That is the power of showing up again and again for a country that needed somebody to trust. The unseen connection. Thousands of miles away from the bright lights of Hollywood, in small towns and quiet neighborhoods, people gathered around their televisions and felt seen. Bob Hope spoke about everyday experiences with respect and understanding. He made ordinary life feel important. He made ordinary people feel included. His connection with the American public was not built through fancy words or complicated humor. It was built through sincerity. That sincerity is why older Americans remember him with such affection today. They remember how he made them laugh. They remember how he made them feel. And they remember the way he seemed to bring the entire country into the same room for just a little while. The legacy of unity. In the end, Bob Hope's greatest achievement was not the number of shows he performed or the awards he won. It was the unity he created. America is a large, diverse country with many stories and many perspectives. But during his era, millions of people shared one thing in common. They all watched Bob Hope. That simple fact helped shape the national identity of an entire generation. And even though those times have passed, the memories remain. Memories of laughter, memories of togetherness, memories of a country that felt a little smaller, a little calmer, and a lot more connected. These memories form one of the most important 25 things only Bob Hope fans will ever understand. The knowledge that one man's voice once helped unite an entire nation. The memories we carry, a final goodbye. As we come to the end of this journey through the world of Bob Hope, there is something important to understand. Something that every person who lived through the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s knows deep in their heart. The Bob Hope era wasn't just a period of entertainment. It was a period of life. For millions of Americans, his voice is tied to memories that stretch across decades. Memories of childhood, family, friendship, and togetherness. And it is those memories that form the final piece of our 25 things only Bob Hope fans remember. The memories we carry. The memories that never leave us. People often underestimate the power of simple moments. A living room filled with warm light, a family gathered around an old TV set, a familiar voice echoing through the house, and the shared laughter that follows. Those moments stay with us. Long after the world changes, long after the television sets are replaced, the houses are sold, the children grow up, and the years move forward. When older Americans look back, they don't just remember the jokes Bob Hope told. They remember who they were sitting next to when they heard them. They remember their mother smiling softly at a Christmas special. They remember their father adjusting the antenna just before the show began. They remember siblings teasing each other during commercial breaks. They remember the warmth of a moment that felt safe, simple, and unbreakable. That is what they carry, and that is why the Bob Hope era lives on in ways that numbers and dates can never explain. The end of an era, but not the end of its impact. Every generation experiences something unique, a sound, a voice, a tradition, a feeling that belongs only to them. For those who lived through the Bob Hope years, that feeling has become more precious with time. Because as the world moves faster, as technology replaces connection, and as entertainment becomes endless, the memory of a simpler era becomes a treasure. People who grew up with Bob Hope often say, "We didn't realize how special it was until it was gone." Not because life was perfect, not because everything was easy, but because life felt shared. Because laughter felt communal. Because Bob Hope brought the entire country into the same moment, again and again. Even after he left the spotlight, his presence remained. Every rerun, every holiday clip, every old black and white photo brings back a piece of that world, the world older Americans still remember, with love. The legacy that belongs to the fans. Bob Hope's legacy is recorded in books, archives, documentaries, and museums. But the real legacy, the living legacy is in people, in the fans who watched him, in the families who gathered around the TV, in the memories passed from parents to children and from children to grandchildren. The true story of Bob Hope isn't written on paper. It's written in the hearts of those who lived through his era. And even as the years pass, even as new generations grow up, with new forms of entertainment, the memories remain. Memories of laughter that came at the end of long days. Memories of joy that arrived when people needed it most. Memories of a voice that made America feel smaller and kinder and closer. These memories belong to the fans, to the people who carried them for a lifetime. The final word, a goodbye that never really ends. As we close this final chapter of our journey, we return to a simple truth. The Bob Hope era may be over, but it is not gone. It lives in stories. It lives in photographs. It lives in the quiet corners of memory, where childhood still feels close, and the world still feels warm, and it lives most of all in the hearts of the people who once gathered in their living rooms, laughing together, smiling together, and sharing a moment that would stay with them forever. For those who remember those days, Bob Hope is more than a comedian. He is a time, a feeling, a symbol of an America that can never be replaced. And so, to everyone who lived through that era, to every person who grew up watching him, to every family who shared in his laughter, to every soul who still smiles when they hear his name, this story is yours, and as long as you carry those memories, Bob Hope lives on. Thank you for taking this journey, and until next time, we'll see you in the next memory.